All right. Well, good morning, Greg, on this Friday morning when we're recording it, this episode. And what we're going to be talking about today is something we've
Yep.
touched on in different episodes. Either directly in a small discussion or implicitly, talking about training. But it comes from a question from one of our listeners who reached out, and it has to do, it has to do a lot with what's called stress inoculation training, and it has to do with how your brain learns and, you know, um, threat sensory neurons and what those trigger and how to do that kind of correctly. And, we have seen the good, the bad, and the ugly with a lot of this stuff in terms of training and,
Yes.
and scenario-based stuff that people come up with. And so I kind of want to have this discussion today, and we're going to talk about a couple things about what elements are needed to have it, what you don't need, and then kind of the broader picture of what happens when we take science from one area and try to apply it to another area. And I guess we'll kind of keep the discussion around that. And I know we'll bounce around a bit, but I figured
Yeah.
I'd start with like a little bit of background about what's called stress inoculation training, right? Because that's basically, it's the psychological concept. It's a form of cognitive behavioral therapy. And so the idea is to build resilience with someone so they can cope effectively with different stressors. So that's the basic thing. And it came from a therapeutic setting. So
Yep.
that could be something as simple as I'm terrified of elevators, right? And I won't go on an elevator and I'm getting some type of psychotherapy for it. And maybe that starts with, Greg, you're my therapist. That would be terrifying, by the way, if you were my therapist.
I kind of
But,
am, I think.
but,
I
but,
kind of fashion myself as
a
that.
therapist or
Yeah.
enabler or,
Well,
so
therapist, the rapist, it's the
yeah,
same word, Brian.
it's right there in the
That's
word.
horrific, you know?
So,
That's horrific.
So, the idea would be, okay, maybe we have to discuss elevators and what triggers that. Then
No,
maybe
right, exactly.
show me a photo of an elevator, and then you can take me to an elevator, and then you can get me on it, and then off of it, and then I go one
Push you
floor, and
down.
then I learn. Yeah. So it's
Exactly.
um, that's a very kind of simple explanation for the reason behind it. But the idea is to put, deal with stressful situations. I have to learn about this now. It kind of got called this stress inoculation, but inoculation is, in that sense, is just sort of an analogy, almost like a vaccination, right? I give you a small dose of something, your body learns, oh crap, I got to fight this off. So that way, the next
Yep.
time I'm exposed to it, especially at a much larger dose or a larger setting, my body goes, nope, I've dealt with this before. I got this. I'm not going to let it get us sick. I'm going to attack this before it becomes a problem. Now, that's a big leap there in a few ways, right? To call that inoculation. But the issue is the the science behind
It
cognitive
feels
behavior.
right. It
Yeah,
sounds
well,
right.
because the science behind, what's called stress inoculation training or cognitive behavioral therapy is good and that may work and there
Yes.
may be a lot to point to. But now to take that and then do a leap into, military law enforcement type training, or you're training for some type of chaotic event, things get a little murky, right? It gets a little bit
It's a
different.
little more than murky. I think that you're running up against some obstacles, right?
You
I
are.
mean, it's fair to say that there are
You,
some strong objections and obstacles to that thinking.
you are. And so I'll start with just a little bit of
Yeah.
background too about back when I was working out at the infantry immersive trainer, and that was the idea behind that on Pendleton, and what General Mattis wanted, and it was built back in 2007 or 8 or whatever it was. But his whole thing was, I want a Marine's first firefight to be no worse than his last training evolution, which, okay, that's a great theory. That's a great intent. Love that sort of mission statement. Okay, now how do you do that? They brought out all the big brain scientists, brought all kinds of different folks, did some different
Yes.
testing, cortisol testing, put you through scenario-based training as realistic as possible. In some ways, we learned, okay, the idea was to learn, what elements do you need, what don't you need, how should this be conducted, because how you conduct it is just as important as the elements you have within that training, because you have to modify to different training levels, what the actual intent is, what your mission is, what the training objectives are. All of that stuff has to be taken into account. And what you find out is it's because that place was another one of those, in the DoD, especially with their endless bucket of money, will build all kinds of stuff and make it look exactly like where you're going, and have people speak the language there, and then have scent generators in there. Remember the dinosaur dung was my favorite
Oh my gosh, I got such a great
flavor
comment
of
for that. Yeah.
scent generator, and we're gonna have all of this stuff in here. And what would often happen is people would become OBE, overwhelmed by events, and then some people were setting up training where it ends up everyone in their team dies, and like what
Yep.
what is going on here? And it completely overwhelms the system, and so you have what I would call negative training. You're actually not learning anything, or you're learning in that case to do the wrong thing. And some of the stuff is taken
Yeah.
and put into training elements, and it becomes they're just, I want to stress you out to see how you do. Okay, well, if that's not an objective, that's not there's no training objective behind that. And if you're just running around, stressing people out or putting them through stuff, and if there's no measurement and assessment, then it's just activity, right? It's not training, it's
Right.
activity. You're just
And
hanging
Brian,
out,
I'd add
running around.
one minor thing. Sometimes we say, yeah, even though it's well intentioned,
Oh yeah.
but a lot of it isn't. What I mean by that is you think you have the best of intentions, but you never did the research to find out that you're
Okay.
creating a negative feedback loop.
Yes.
So
And
it's dangerous.
yeah,
It's not just that we're opposed to this.
that's the
We're
point.
saying that it's dangerous.
That it has the potential is a negative outcome to
Precisely.
instill the
So
wrong,
reinforced.
yeah,
Yeah,
you're reinforcing the wrong response, and you're
exactly.
reinforcing this idea that you are going to get overwhelmed, and this is what you need to do. And then I even see stuff, and we talked about this too with some of the different like virtual reality and video based training stuff that we've done, and
Yeah.
we consult with, and we write different programs for. Another one I've seen is where we try to mimic real events or come up with, I'm going to make you do all this physical activity, and then we're going to do a live fire drill or a simulation drill, a video based simulation, whatever it is, and I'm going to get your heart rate up and get you sweating and moving to simulate some sort of realistic scenario. And again, that's one of those where like I understand what you're talking about, but that's like you're just doing like fear-based preparation. Like you're going to prepare
Yep.
to be scared, and this is what's going to happen, and you have to learn how to deal with it. And I think that's kind of the wrong way to look at it, because one, and we've talked about this before, is there's a difference between an increase in oxygen demand for my body because I'm
Yes.
working out is one thing, right? That's going to increase my heart rate and blood pressure, all this stuff, limit my performance a little bit. That's completely different than a response of an increase of heart rate due to a sympathetic nervous system response, right? A fight or flight
Yep.
response releasing epinephrine and cortisol and all that stuff. Those are two completely different pathways, and you can't just, otherwise we would just, I don't know, cardio would be, I'm going to go smoke meth because that's going to jack my heart rate up and have all these responses. And now that's
Why
the
not?
same as running on the treadmill, right? I mean,
Why not?
so
Why not
so
suggest that as an option?
it's the same thing. So there's a lot in here that I kind of just brought up, Greg, and I want to throw to you. But when
Yeah,
it
you
comes
mean
when
to
it
make some sense out of that? Because
yeah. So
everything,
well,
no,
I want to
everything that you said made sense, but I'll street it up a
no,
little.
no, no, no. I just want to lay out some of the elements that we're
Yeah,
discussing here,
I
because
love it.
and to just inform
Oh,
everyone
you made
listening right
a
now,
couple of great
this
points.
is where it's coming from, right? This is
Yeah,
where these terms come from. This is what we've seen before. This is where we've seen things go wrong before in the past. And sometimes it's well intentioned, but something well intentioned could be catastrophic and do something wrong. And
precisely.
if there's no point and purpose
Absolutely.
behind it, then why are you
Why
doing it?
do it?
And what are the
Why are you
what are the
spending a line
outcomes?
item on it?
Yeah,
What's your claim?
exactly. And all right,
I
so
agree.
that's kind of what we lay out. But again, and I want to try to answer, Greg,
So
like, well, what elements eventually we answer
yeah,
throughout the
yeah. So
discussion?
let's
What elements do need to be there? What does
right.
this really mean? How do I make sense of it? How do I use some of the good science
Yeah,
to inform my own training that I'm doing?
yeah. So let's start with a very simple theme. First of all, folks, CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, has been around for a good long time, and it works.
Yeah.
As a
Yep.
matter of fact, it works very well in stuff like dealing with a person that has a drug or an alcohol or a fetish where they can't get out of the abuse cycle. It works very well. Okay. And it's got a rich history. So there's like 17 or 18, you'll have to check me on this, different functions of cognitive behavioral therapy, where stress inoculation is like the seventh. So it's
Okay.
one of the
It's one
many
of the
things.
many things
And,
that fall
and
under it.
so
Yeah.
so people like people say, well, heuristics. I hear heuristics used all the time. And I hear it used wrong. And there's
Well, there's a
so
lot of
many types of
yeah.
heuristics.
There's a lot
And
of
so
different
so
heuristics.
understand that when you go in there and just use cognitive behavioral therapy, you're talking of a field of study, right? So then let's talk about stress inoculation. The goal of stress inoculation is to help you build resistance to sources of stress or anxiety. It's in the title, and you said it perfectly because it mimics how we would go after a disease, right? How
Right.
we'd go after a virus. And so it teaches your mind to react to possible stressors in a healthier way with better outcomes than it's doing right now. So that's directly to the point that you were talking about influencing training the wrong way. And I'll give you two very brief examples before I go to Dean's comment and how important Dean's question was.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
Brian, number one, you made the scent generator comment. I will posit this for everybody listening. A scent generator without olfactory training is absolutely useless and counterproductive. What do I mean by that? Okay, if I just have to keep stumbling through the thing and then come out and you go, hey, did you notice anything? And I go, it smelled like shit in there. Hey,
Yeah.
exactly. Now go back through and we're going to do it a couple. That's what combat smells like. No. So if you
Yeah.
were going to do something and you said something simple like, hey, do me a favor, go get one cotton ball. And Brian, before you come into the room, do me a favor, put some nail polish remover on it. And then as we're talking, you walk in and you walk up and down the aisles. And then you stand by the door. And I go, hey, anybody know what that is? And somebody goes, yeah, nail polish remover. And I go, why is that important? And then we start talking about acetone and how that smell should be in a nail salon. But Brian, now we're finding it overpoweringly in a parking garage. And guess what? Maybe that's what bombs are made of. You understand how we're tying something to it. And cognitively, we're doing the Rubik's Cube. Let's
Right.
put one of these in there till the explanatory storyline fits. But that's not what they were doing. They were shoving smells in
Yeah.
there without any training that went onto it. I'll go to the next one. When we were in someplace in Colorado conducting training just before this big Utah was having the Olympics. And so we had all the security teams that had come in and we were doing training for them. And so it was some time ago. So they had their training lane set up and they go, hey, what do you think we should add? And so, and this is called a dick move in science. So we had the units had to come in and each one of them were timed and they were measured for their response and how they did. So the unit came in and you know how shoot lanes, sometimes they have these portable doors that you can boot the door, ram the door, do
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
So we set 3 up on the lane where you would park before you went out to do the shooting, and each one of them had an address on it. So you got a dispatch call off the range. You had to have your weapons, which everything's loaded, get into one of the scout cars that was available and ready for you that had already been trained and tested and safe. And you had to drive, you know, the 3/4 of a mile on this dirt road to get to the range. And then you pulled up and you call out at the scene, right? And then you walk up and none of the doors are the right address. That's flipping
Yeah.
cognitive training.
Yeah.
Now what
Yeah.
do
It
you do?
is.
Okay. So everybody's ready to boot the door and they're going and they go, hey, we got a thing. Now the next phase of it is now they have to solve for X. We've got the right door. And they went in and during the training, ceasefire was called, lock and clear all weapons. Okay, we have an injury here, and it was the drag dummy. I have to move the drag dummy from location 1 to location 2, and I have to try evac strategy while taking fire. Now, what you're doing, Brian, is you're making a think piece that's
Right.
involved with all the training that
All
you're
the training
talking
that
about.
you're doing.
Okay, so skillfully blending a flippant scenario isn't just saying, hey, one time we walked into Buscemi's and it was getting robbed. And that's what we're
Yeah.
doing. And I know I'm poking some people in the eye, but listen, I've seen your stuff. And just because you're a PhD doesn't mean your stuff holds water. There are elements of training that have to be vetted and tested. And those elements of education have to be infused at the right point for it to be true cognitive training. And Dean made a comment
Yeah.
about Lee's research paper in 2022. And Brian, we can put a link
I'll
on
put
that
the link
site.
in it so
Yeah.
you can go ahead and read
So,
part of
so
that if you have
basically,
it. Or
this is
yeah.
I've got it right up here.
Yeah.
And so he said, mounting evidence from human and animal studies reports at least concept of a new roadmap of how threats are processed in the sensory cortex. And this theory fills a long-standing gap and resolves an important controversy and myth in the research of threat processing. So the point being that the brain's sensory cortex stores long-term mnemonic representations of threats, meaning humans can relive the past or simulate future scenarios by integrating features of their memory into the assessment of a new situation. Pause. Your brain already does it.
It does.
And
Yeah.
just because what you're doing is you're saying, hey, the amygdala is the old center of fear. What
Right.
we found is that the sensory cortex lights up before the amygdala. Of course
Of
it
course
does.
it does. It has to.
It
It
has
has to
to.
inform the
But it's
amygdala.
not the
Yeah.
only one, right? So
Yes.
we've got visual cues, we've got auditory cues, we've
Yeah.
got the sensory perception from your dactyl, from skin, from touching. We have, your fear part of your amygdala doesn't trigger fear when it's testing. It's testing the environment so you don't go to your fear response, and it only inhibits the prefrontal cortex when it gets enough sensors that say something is going sideways. So not to make Dean, your question
Yeah, it was
was
great.
valid and perfect, and it was based on a great study. I agree. It's a small test group hypothesis,
Yeah.
but I'm telling you what they didn't do. They didn't tell you this is how things already are, because all of those things, like Brian said, parasympathetic. Your sympathetic and your parasympathetic are constantly sampling your environment. Why? To make it less dangerous and stressful for you. Why? Because your brain doesn't want you to spend any of your sensory neurons on useless shit. Why? Because they've already been cataloged to do what, Brian? To measure your environment for danger or opportunity. Yeah. So it's a great question, and so the bigger question he was asking is, because this influences how we respond to fear triggers,
Yeah.
couldn't we use it in training? And we're right back to where you started. Absolutely. But we can't use cognitive behavioral therapy in the sense of developing training, but we can use inoculation training to enforce cognitive behavioral therapy. For example, Brian, I remember your first ID encounter. It's still in your brain like it happened yesterday.
Yeah.
I don't want to trigger it now because we're not going to get through the gosh damn call, but the idea, or the podcast, but the idea is, if I gave you, and we discussed this with General Steve Layfield, Mattis, and Amos, sitting out at the back of the IET that one day on those folding chairs before the big section was built. If we could have that Marine that has PTS, or that soldier, walk back down the street that we can recreate infinitely in
Yeah.
those environments, and have a successful outcome to that IED encounter, defuse the situation,
Yeah.
see that they could get people out of there, would that influence them? And the answer is clearly yes, because attitudes and beliefs change. And inoculation theory would function as a motivational strategy to protect your attitudes from change, so you would still be the center of your world. You wouldn't have collapsed when those people died. You would go, okay, I got knocked down, but I get up again, Chumbawamba. And look, I can make a difference here. I can give myself first aid. I can call for a unit. Do you see what I'm saying? All those things that you felt disabled. What are our worst fears in our dreams? We're pulling the trigger and the gun's not firing. You get what I'm trying to say?
Yeah.
The big monster is coming and I can't do anything about it.
Yeah.
That flashlight's not working in the basement. So, Brian, cognitive behavioral therapy is one thing, and it's the most effective means of treatment for things like substance abuse and mental health disorders. Why? Because you change and challenge the patterns and beliefs and trade them for something good.
Yes.
But in training, you have one chance to do it right cognitively. And what you have to do is you have to set up cognitive cues that lead to a likely outcome. And does the person achieve it, or do they not? And if you don't set it up that way, then basically what you have is Tom flipped the tires faster than Billy did, and June did the fastest reload after climbing the rope. What does that data give you? How does that data prepare you for the real event on the
And
street?
so yeah, and that goes back to the, is this are we eliciting some sort of physiological response due to exercise, or are we eliciting it because our limbic system is engaged and we're having a sympathetic nervous system response, and there's something there. I give
Yeah,
the
yeah.
example.
Add to that, add to what you just said, because that's a great thing. That should be the center argument. Brian, we're supposed to be replacing poor coping skills, cognition, emotion, behaviors, with more adaptive coping skills.
Right.
So how can it be fear triggered?
Well,
How can we rely on
that
training
that
that's only about fear?
that
Do you see
that's
what I'm
the
saying?
that's the thing, is that, you've heard me give the example to people before when they're talking about doing those. Well, we have these certain physical requirements, and then we're going to make you, run around the building and throw the kettlebell around and do
Yep.
burpees, and then you're going to come in and you're going to do, whether it's the video simulator or the live fire range, and okay, like, that's skill building and it's marksmanship training. It's
Yep.
marksmanship training and it's working out. Those are the two things you're doing. It's like, well, no, it's developing, this to operate under this response. I'm like, no, you want to learn how to do that? All right, tell you what, right now, give me your pistol and your 3 mags. I'm going to load them up. I'm not going to tell you how many rounds are in each one. I'm going to have you do no running, no lifting, nothing. We're going to go to the range, and I'm not going to tell you the course of fire or how much time you have, and until we get to each line. And then here's the thing: if you fail, you're fired.
right? Grab
Which
your
one would
shit
you which one
eh,
would you rather do? I'll take the workout all day long
all
because
day.
that uncertainty and creating that sympathy, like meaning I'm not saying go do that. I'm saying that's an example of that that to you is psychologically terrifying, whereas the
Exactly.
other one is physically difficult. Two completely different things.
But you need both.
Right.
Listen, cops die pushing a stalled car out of an
Well,
intersection
yeah,
because they have a
I,
myocardial infarction. So we
yeah.
need the health-based
I'm
stuff, and
not
we
saying
need
that.
the tactics for the reload. No, no, I'm saying you have to say that because there are people listening that are combining those things together when they can't fit. And you're saying, yeah, but in a real event, I have to run and jump and do.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got it. But you know
Yeah.
what? Your cognitive brain is going, yeah, I get all that, and I'll be ready when you're ready. Okay. What it's saying though is it's saying critical thinking and advanced critical thinking. So what's the difference? Critical thinking, everybody does. Critical thinking.
Yeah.
Holy shit! Should I have this next hamburger or should I go to the gym? Right? We all do that all the time, and we make decisions based on it. So what's the difference between advanced critical thinking? Advanced critical thinking is when you start lining up the options and you say these have certain benefits and these have certain outcomes that are not beneficial. And guess what? I want to replace my errors in thinking by doing healthier and smarter patterns, right? So that's advanced critical thinking. So not just can I use it to get myself out of this room, one of those games where they got the challenges to get out of the room, but can I apply one thing that I learned from that room next
Yeah.
time I encounter somebody on the street or I'm on a traffic stop or somebody comes in waving a gun around? If you can't equate those, the challenge to the real event, then what you're doing is you're having fun, but it ain't training.
Yeah, and it's certainly not. Yeah, so that kind of leads to what is stress inoculation training then? What does that actually mean? Is that even a real thing? Can
Yes.
I actually do it? And what would it actually look like? And it's not that it's a real thing in the sense, but I think a lot of people get mixed up, and I've always called it, are you doing stress inoculation or is this just sensory deprivation? Meaning the first time I eat a flashbang, dude, that thing's brutal.
Yep.
You do enough of them, you're throwing them at each other for fun at that point.
Yep.
Okay. It's not that I'm really that doesn't removing that or not having that be such a powerful stimulus to me anymore. Yes, of course, in a situation that's going to it doesn't increase my ability to sense, make, and problem solve. It just doesn't. I won't get as overly whelmed cognitively. Like my cognitive load
Yes.
won't become overwhelmed in that situation because I've already been exposed to this thing before.
That's a form
However,
of inoculation.
right. However, that won't help me think any better in that situation. It will in the sense that I'm not overwhelmed, so I have more cognitive bandwidth, so to speak, right? But
Yes.
it doesn't give me better options. You know what I'm
So
saying?
so it limits your options, and this is why it's dangerous. So today we're doing the CSCN gas house, and we're gonna take our masks off in the middle as always,
Yep.
march around like
Yeah,
idiots
do some
saying
jumping
something.
jacks and yeah.
Okay. And so what I learned through my inoculation, meaning that each time that I do it, I hate it more, is that on that day, I'm going to go to the dentist or I'm going to find another thing to do so I can skip it. You get what I'm trying to say? Because I don't want to do it. So avoidance isn't an effective means of treatment. Yeah. Okay. So then what do you learn from the flashbang or the Gaussian room where you go in and they lit you up with the paintballs or
Sim
the
rounds,
simunition,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
What do you learn? You learn not to go in that damn room because when you're so
That
what's happening
happens.
is your
Yeah.
cause and effect is skewed and you begin to do what scientists have referred to as gaming the game. So you have adaptive coping skills, that's what we teach, and you have gaming the game. Where do you want to be when this ends up? And so what do you need to add to training? Well, you can have 10 people in line on a football field and have your person with their sim gun ready to go. And then one steps forward, one puts the thing and runs her hand through their hair, and then one lays down on the ground really quick, and one reaches and comes out with a wallet. You can do that all day long. And the flinch reflex is going to start becoming inoculated against those rapid movements because there's only one or two out of the people that come up with a weapon, and one is a guy with a bat, which is easy, and one is a guy with a gun, which is much more complicated. Brian, what consequences did I learn?
Right.
And are those consequences immediately adaptive as a future coping skill? And if they're not, here I'm back at it again. You're not training, you're just having fun. And I know that's
Well,
poking people in the eye, but it's not meant that way.
it
What
it's
skills are you transferring?
well, that is I'm training for a faster response. And that's what
But
all
how
of
does that
this,
replace an
well,
error?
that's what I'm
I'm
saying.
with you. I
So
know, and I
a
just want
lot
to.
of what this comes down to
Yep.
is what I see is, you're getting better and better at training for your response to something. And that
And you are, and you're
when
really
everyone's,
good.
but we're missing the point. And the point is you don't have to let it get to that level.
Right.
The point is there's a series of events that happen before that, or there's things I can determine or influence the outcome. If I'm constantly going through, it's like it's like people I know of every different type of gadget and weapon system and this, that, and the other thing they got all at their house, and this, well, if this
Yeah.
happens, that, we're going to do this. And if this, and I'm like, so you're just going to wander through life just reacting to
So
whatever situation comes up. Okay.
I got one for you.
Like,
I got one for you.
eventually you're
That
going to reach one that you didn't think of, though. You know what I mean?
okay. So here's two for you, Brian, to get you going. The one is that every single movie and book that were written about a person that was going to go to the gas chamber or be hung or anything else was that their last meal they were going to ask for a turkey leg so they can fashion it into a weapon and stab their way out. So if you're sitting there going, I've been in solitary for 23 years, but my
And
way
this
out
is
is
the
going to be
way
this
out.
turkey leg, and it's right on the gallows, probably not a good life
You,
insurance
you,
plan, right?
well, you had more
So
time in there to think of something
I
else.
think so. So the second part of that is we encounter people sometimes that come up with good, rudimentary, but good cognitive challenges. So, for example, uh, during this scenario, you have to make a chess move, not a checkers move. You have to play this chess match and keep it going. Now, listen, I'm not making fun of anybody. That's true cognitive training,
Yeah.
but it's not outcomes based. And what do I mean by that?
Well,
What I mean is if you go up against a chess champion in the next challenge,
well,
okay, you're
that's
going to have
no,
an
no, no.
advantage, right?
So here's how I would explain that,
Yeah.
and say I've seen stuff like that before, and I think it could be
Yes.
good. I think it's good if obviously the outcome is not what you do in the chess game, the outcome is what you do in the training portion,
But
right?
how, if it's equally weighted, how
No,
do
no,
you
no. And
protect
it's,
against
well,
that?
as long as how you're measuring that effectiveness, and even
Precisely.
then, you have to remember too, it's not how well they did at the training. It's how did this work out in a real life situation? I mean, that's
Exactly.
the ultimate. That's what we, and honestly, I see a lot of great stuff where I'm like, hey, this is good, and I love your measurement. Oh, look how well it works. It's like, no, that's how well the training works within the training scenario. Like,
Yes.
you have to, the measurement comes because which is the most difficult part of all of this, because, and this is why I caution in general, why I said it at the beginning, of going from the science in the lab to the street, because there's a
A
big jump
chasm.
there.
Oh
There's a
yeah, there
big
is.
jump, and so it doesn't always translate. Some of it, or at maybe at a theoretical or conceptual level it will, but not in the way you measurement in a college course with a bunch of folks going through getting their
It's different.
PhDs, masters, and undergrads, right? Versus an actual real life situation. And you
Yep.
can mimic that so much, right?
Yes.
But to get it close enough, you can't always measure all of these different things that we're learning and trying to do. So you have to, because it's not just these micro interactions, maybe, Greg. It's like, okay, well,
Exactly.
you
And
went through
that's
this.
literally what cognitive behavioral therapy is
It's
recreating those micro.
Yes. But
It's
very,
exactly what it
yeah,
is.
very specific context.
And
Okay, I'm
limited.
recreating
Exactly.
this because your fear of elevators, your fear
Yes.
of public speaking. So I'm going to go have you public speak. Okay, well, now what we're talking about is I got to understand the situation, and I'm going to simulate it, but it's not going to be anything like it's not going to be like the one you're going to experience in life, meaning there's going to be some differences there. So if I can't get you to extrapolate and conceptualize that
Yep.
information from this training exercise to a real event, that's where the leap has to go. That's where
Yep.
the most important part of that leap is, to get it in the street, because the science is great in the classroom, and I'll read the book and I'll put it right back on the fucking shelf where it belongs
Because
because
it
it
does not impact your
doesn't always
axons
help
and
me.
dendrites. It
Right.
cannot. It cannot. So look, you can teach someone how to categorize problems into emotion focused or problem focused. So
Okay.
you have these two things, right? And the idea behind both of them is so they can better treat their negative situations by giving them a skill that they can use to cope with the stresses. So
But
you can ramp that back to the left so
hmm
it's at the trigger points. So a scent there makes sense. A
yeah.
sound there makes sense. Why? because in the behavioral therapy, meaning in a controlled setting, now you say, hey, you use this term a lot. You say, hey, listen, I knew better than go in the house because it was domestic going on at my own house, so I just went to the neighbor's house to eat. We both have that experience growing up, you know, and it's just how things were in Detroit and Chicago, right? So you learned that. You don't know when you learned that, but there's certain triggers that came with that memory. And this is right back to Dean's comment, right? So now I have that mental model and it's tucked away. And all of a sudden I come in and I hear a plate get dropped. And then I hear a loud voice, Brian, and I
Yeah.
smell that something's burning on the stove. And immediately I'm transported back. And
Hmm.
now I'm back into a negative interpretation, a negative cognitive interpretation that I have to overcome. And what did we do? We cried, or we hid behind mom's skirt, or we ran. So what we try to do with Hoberman, everybody kiss my ass. I'm not trying to sell Hoberman. I'm just trying to talk about habits and behaviors. What we did is we swapped negative cognitive interpretations, but more gosh damn consequences for positive ones. So
Okay.
what we did is we made the lava, and if you stepped in the lava, your foot burned. I'm being metaphorical,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
But listen, you don't have to step in the lava 17 times at the
See,
beginning of the scenario to learn that. But
yeah.
now what we did is we did the what's that guy's name? Raiders of the Lost Ark. We went in and he stepped on the thing and it fell. Then he had to play the
Yeah, the
tune, and
Indiana
then the
Jones.
things came.
Yeah, yeah,
What
yeah.
we did is we put hard but solvable situations. So we took the CBT challenges, Brian, but we put them into a real event, not for that scenario. If you're watching that scenario and going, well, I may never encounter that. That's the point. The
Well,
point
that's
is
the
that you
point.
may never
Okay, so
encounter
you're
this.
getting to the
Yes.
point of what we're getting at here too. Is the first rule of simulation is you can simulate anything, but you
Yes.
can't simulate everything,
Nope.
and you don't need to. So
You don't need to, and
I
you shouldn't.
so
Right.
it's taking the element, like you brought up a bunch of different situations, whether it's an
Yep.
interaction with a group of people, a domestic violence situation,
Yep.
whatever it
A
is.
car accident.
Right.
Somebody
I can
getting
I can
mouthy in
I
the
can boil
checkout line.
I can boil those all down and find out,
Yes.
what's the core elements that are involved in all of them. What are the ingredients? And then now I can take
That's
those ingredients
exactly the role of a trainer.
and set them up into a scenario, right? And as long as those ingredients there and they happen in a manner, uh, in a somewhat logical manner, as if they would in real life. It doesn't have to be
Yep.
exact, right? It's just
Nope.
close enough. Then my brain learns I'm actually dealing with, okay, I see what the situation is here. There's way too much salt in this right now. Okay, I see what this situation is here. There's way too much pepper here. Oh, I see this is cooked too much.
Exactly.
So now no matter what I'm eating, I will understand what that underlying issue is, and then I can address it. And if I put those into different simulated training events, then I'm doing it for real. It's like I do with the insert at home. I always do scenario
Exactly.
based training, but it's not. They don't. I do it. I do the Miyagi sometimes because that's the only way the girls will listen to me. Is I have to be training them without them knowing that they're being trained,
That's so
and
funny
I
because
set
you're
up little.
outnumbered.
Well,
Exactly.
it's the I used to do the story one with the insurgent where we tell stories at night, and then I would have her, we go back and forth. I'd start it or she'd start it, and then we'd take this characters, and but what I'm doing is a soft interrogation because I'm inputting
It's so
different
funny.
characters in to elicit a response out of her because I'm trying to see what's on her mind or what's important to her. So we just did this one, but as she's getting older now, it's like getting goofier, funnier. She kind of knows it, and then she came up with this one, and then there was this weird thing where this girl was sleeping and she was having these crazy dreams and she went into this whole thing, and then I ended the
Right.
story because I wanted to go to bed, and I go, yes, and it turns out the police came to the house and they got everyone out and they didn't know what it was, and then the fire department showed up and they found it was just a gas leak underneath her room, and I go, and that's why we changed the batteries on our carbon monoxide detector every year. And she busted out laughing. She's like, why did you end the story that way? I was like,
Because I went all the
I
way
go,
through.
I have to tie
Exactly.
in a lesson here somewhere, but
Okay, Aesop.
it was
Yeah,
something so simple, and she's
that's
like,
so
you're
funny.
so annoying. But the point I'm trying to make is
Right.
interjecting those spirals into it. I get to one see I get to challenge you
You're
cognitively to see
controlling the
how you think
outcome.
it, and
Come
to
on.
make minor corrections if
Exactly.
necessary.
In stride. So what you're talking about there is, look, there's a paradigm shift because for all the thinking people in the room, and I don't mean that as an insult. Some of you tune in just to hear Brian and I swear. Some of you tune in because you're wondering, can I get fatter and still sit in his chair? Whatever your
or,
motivation for
or what
tuning
are
in,
Brian's
right?
hair products that he
Exactly. And what
uses?
pants are you wearing today,
Yeah,
Brian?
I know.
But the idea is that the bottom line of it is this: inoculation training at its inception was designed to give you small doses of what you were going to face. So when you did face it, it wasn't going to be as bad.
Right.
And while well-meaning, okay, the real way to do something is to say, listen, you're always going to have fear. It's shitty being in a firefight.
Yeah.
These explosions near you that rip that person in half, and now you've got all this black shit coming out of your nose and you're not sure if you're going to live and die. We all get that. But you can power through it. And here's how. So what you got to do is you got to challenge a person's way of thinking. Because
Yes.
before it was saying inoculation is built so we can't challenge your way of thinking. We can't change the fundamental who you are. But the idea is you have to do that. You have to change my way of thinking and reacting to certain external elements, or I'm not adaptable. And the key to resilience is adaptability. So when I go in, I'm always going to be scared. It's okay to be scared. A fucking dispatcher is going to be scared when they're sending you this shitty call and they're not even there. Ride that wave. How do I put forth my best human performance in that situation? And real cognitive training challenges exactly that. It's not a magic pill that you bite and I'm not afraid anymore. You're always
Well,
going to be afraid.
yeah, and it's creating the positive kind of biases, right? Because I know everyone thinks of bias as a bad word. It's
They're
absolutely
so
not a
wrong.
bad word, but
Exactly.
the reason why some people are really really good at something is because they have built up the expert level biases in that specific
Exactly.
domain, and allow them to think faster and move faster and see things before anyone
Exactly.
within
And
a
we call that
specific
an
domain.
expert model, right?
Yeah, so
Okay. So whether it's in sports or thinking.
that's what those are, and kind of what you were talking about too is how we frame those discussions and how we look at it. I mean, it used to be, if you ever have to, shoot someone or kill someone, it's going to be the hardest thing you ever have to do, and it's going to fundamentally change your life. Well, yeah, now it will. Now it will,
Yeah.
because
Thanks.
you train me to
Thanks for
think that
that.
way. It's
Killing's
like,
easy. People
yeah,
are doing it every day.
I
You
think
get what I'm trying to say?
it's well, Greg, it's been a trend since humans have been around. I don't think it's going
Heck,
anywhere.
there
We've
were two
actually
guys I read about,
we
you know.
we do it a lot less now than we used to, actually. But
No, no, no.
but but
You're
but
touching
you
on
you
that
get what I'm
again.
saying. That
Yeah,
gets into how you frame it and what you're talking about.
that's it.
If I give you the option, if I tell you this is what's going to happen to you in this situation, then that's what's going to happen to you in this situation. If I tell you that you have options, I just remember literally one time I was doing a thing and I
Yeah,
hadn't slept in 2 days and hadn't eaten in 3 days or whatever it was, or 2 days. And I was like, this guy's like, well, hey, how you feeling? I was like, I can barely stand up. Like, I don't,
right.
I'm so tired. I'm so hungry. And he's like, yeah, you haven't slept in 2 days. And I think you ate once the other day. So they should be. And it just kind of hit me like, oh, okay. So I feel normal. And they're like, there you go.
Right, right.
Normal given the situation that I was in. But you get what I'm saying. It's
I get
how
exactly
you
that.
frame it right there is can reduce the number of errors that I make in reasoning.
Attributions should equal error correction, meaning that your training should have positive outcomes that we trade for likely negative outcomes. And the interpretation that your brain makes can either be emotion focused or problem focused. So training that is only problem focused means that, okay, we have to be diverse and have equity and inclusion. So when you go up, make sure that you don't use these 9 words when you're talking to this next person. So now I'm front loaded for having to do context and relevance on lexicon rather than saying, does this guy have a gun or not? Or how do I de-escalate? You
Right.
can't occupy that same room. So what do I mean? I mean, now that I walk up to the guy and I go, hey, boys, listen up. And the guy goes, boy, oh, here I am. I'm in the shit. So now what I did is I went from a problem-focused approach where I wanted to come in and de-escalate, always be considering de-escalation, and I drove home an emotion-focused answer because now I'm pissed, they're pissed, and I have to come back through everything. So how do I do that? So what I do is I get into a situation. How do we get into a pool? There's 2 ways. We dip my toe and go in
Yeah.
gradually, or we jump in. So a problem-focused approach is we're jumping in. An emotion-focused approach is we have to understand the urge to jump in, Brian, but we have to give ourselves the gift of time and distance and control who? Us. So if we can infuse into training controlling us. So you said biases. Are there helpful biases? There is as many or more helpful
Yeah.
biases that
Yeah.
we use every day than negative biases.
Yeah.
So what do we want to do? We want to trade them. I come in and I go, look at this piece of shit here. That's the
Yep.
first thing that's coming
Yep.
out of my brain, not out of my mouth, but out of my brain. So who do I got to fix? And we recently went to a bunch of great people that have what they cultivated as an outward mindset.
Yeah.
So if you can solve you, then you can take that emotion focused problem and regulate it and solve the problem focused question. And that's what training needs to do. Training needs to teach me the skills, not how to reload my weapon. I get that. Not how to
Yeah. Well, those
be
are, yeah,
better marksman. I get that.
sure.
Not how to smell a
Well,
gas leak and not,
yeah.
make sure that I call the right people. But what it's doing is it's saying certain elements are going to come up during the training. And what we want you to do is solve for X by telling us which of these elements are more weighted than the other. And then the person goes, what do you mean? Well, for example, if I see a triple beam scale and I see some empty cellophane packets on the counter, and I see a shrink wrapper, and I also notice that the place is a rental. You get what I'm trying to say? And the name is Kevin Smith, and there's traffic 24 hours a day. Houston, if I add all those things up, I may have a intent to deliver situation for a drug. And you're saying, yeah, but we would all know that. No, you don't know that, because now what we do, Brian, is we put the things outside on a folding table, and we put a
Yeah.
piece in the garage, and we
Right.
put a piece under the floor mat of the car. True cognitive training means if I have these external influences and stressors, can I still operate cognitively to do advanced critical
And,
thinking and come up with likely storylines?
and
That's the answer of training.
no, and then now to how do I induce some sort of arousal out of that to get it to
Exactly.
learn faster? Because we're all about accelerated learning. There's a lot of even just the skills of the basics. I mean, yes, people need to learn how to shoot and reload and all that stuff, but a lot
And
of
we
that,
acquiesce that. We
well,
testify that we understand that.
a lot of that takes way longer than it should due to how it's trained. But
Yep.
I'm not gonna even go down that path. You can move a lot
Yep.
faster with adults than people choose to do. But whatever. But what you were talking about is one. Obviously, I'm creating that idea of how to sense, make, and problem solve. But I need a little bit of arousal in there, and and meaning the way I kind of describe it is your brain hates being wrong more than it likes being right. I mean, we always
Amen.
like being right and we like craving that dopamine. So, and that's what it's expecting and that's what it wants. So when it's wrong, it really does not like being wrong. So if it is wrong, you make a mistake, it will want to rapidly correct that mistake, but it can't be too powerful a mistake. And when that interaction was funny, and I don't want to get into too much detail, the phone we literally just got off of with that organization, and they were talking about,
Yep.
well, if this, because they were AI and data behind it and
Yep.
interacting with an avatar based thing, they said, well, actually we found the sweet spot was just slightly negative but not too much that they didn't like it, because if they were happy all the time and interacting, then it just became a happy thing, and they weren't getting out of it. So this slightly negative way of doing it, and I was like, well,
Is
obviously
always better.
because that's all,
That's how humans work.
which it's just funny how they measured it down to a decimal point on their
Yep.
scale, which I thought was cool. But that's something we could said right at the beginning. So, well, you're going to want to make it slightly this way. And what am I getting at is that story, it has to kind of intrigue me, and it has to have a potentially dangerous outcome, but I need to see that there's a win, and I need to see that there's a lot of decisions
Exactly.
that can get me to that win, that I have options. It's not this scary thing that I'm going to go through. It's, look, you're going to see this. Here's what it smells like a little bit. It's, okay, go drive the car around the track for a long time, get those tires heated up and the engine
Yep.
hot so you can, oh, okay, I know what that smells
Why?
like now.
Because that sense memory
Yeah.
is just like cooking. Like when you go
Yeah. Oh,
to a
yeah.
fancy place that's got the piano playing in the background. I'm thinking of Bruno's in Madison Heights. Anybody that knows where that is, oh my gosh! When you go in there, Brian, a good chef is not just picking the right meat or the right vegetables. They're picking the right cooking temperature and
Yeah.
how long, and
And
do they
the
have the
right
umami for
pan
the
and
taste on the
yeah,
tongue?
the
Oh
right,
my
yeah.
gosh! And the
Yeah.
right knife to cut the
Yeah.
sushi. There's all of these things, and that's the situation you're facing as a copper or a first responder or any human resources or as a school teacher. So you come in and you've got all of this palette of beautiful things that you can build. What we're saying is look for the gaps in those palettes and look for the incongruent signals. By the way, I'm going to add marbles to your omelet this morning. Those things don't fit. When you get those are the cues in your environment that something going sideways. And I'm going back to my DEI remark only because DEI has been around since the dawn of man. It makes you have a stronger culture and team. So embrace it early. Next, You have to control your emotions when you're going into the situation because your emotions will cripple you and make you limit options. And then we have to have enough problems in training that when I come to a new or novel problem, it's kind of close enough to that other one. Brian, I'm not dealing with a bulldozer, but it's a semi truck. And you know what? So it's close enough. All guns are close enough. Okay.
Yeah,
All
right,
explosives are
right. It's
close
close
enough.
enough.
So
I get it.
so
Yeah,
let's not sit there and spend our money on useless interactions with inanimate objects
yeah,
that don't force my critical thinking. And you know what? You're talking blood flow. You know what takes blood? Your brain takes blood.
yeah,
So the minute that you're not getting that rich oxygenated blood to your brain, you're not thinking. So what are we saying? We're saying change your entire training protocol? No, we're saying just like that cooking example, you can add a little bit of garlic or a little bit of acid or a little
hmm,
bit of endive at some point in the process, and you can make your training so much better. So
yes,
go to somebody. It doesn't have to be us, but go to somebody that does this type of training, and what would you say, Brian? It enhances.
yeah,
It creates more fidelity, which creates more operations.
yeah.
But what's the danger of fidelity?
Yeah, you don't need to. Yeah,
We,
you go
we need
too
a little
far.
bit.
Yeah, you
Exactly.
don't, and that goes into
That's cooking right back. I'm
you
hungry
don't
again.
need everything to be perfect. It doesn't have to
Nope.
have this perfect fidelity, whether it's the best graphics or the best,
You
you
can
know,
practice with a folding chair.
all of the
Add on
different,
duty roll
you
call.
know,
Yep. Yep.
that was the military thing with like, okay, we're gonna get, signs and buildings that we're gonna make it up to with all the
Yep.
set dressing to make it look
Every
like
license
this.
plate.
And then we're gonna
Yep.
get people that speak that language. And I was like, hey, did any people in this training unit speak that language? Well, no.
Exactly.
Okay, so it really doesn't matter what language
We
they're
could do
speaking.
pig Latin.
You
Yeah.
just want to simulate a language barrier. That's pretty
Yep.
easy to do, right? Just,
Yep.
but and it's I don't need to look for the exact thing. It's a prototypical match. I don't need
Your
it to
brain ain't.
it
Exactly.
really doesn't
So
care. Your
that's a
brain's
good
going to
thing.
fill in
So
those details. It doesn't matter.
precisely. So a template match is exactitude. It's the exact
Yeah,
same part that's being built on an assembly line to microscopic perfection. Your brain doesn't work in that. Your brain chunks information, which
right.
means that it does prototypical matches. It's where we get the concept of close enough. And all you posers out there that are using my shit and not saying it, those things are the things that you need to understand because a prototypical match is cognitively close enough. And guess what? You spend a lot less money, Brian, so you can
Right.
spend more money on your community. You spend less on the decals on your scout car and those flipping coins that you're passing out, and you can spend more
You're
on
so
triage training. Hey,
you're,
can kiss my ass.
you're
I saw
so
more today.
you're so anti-coin, and that's
I'm
why no
sorry.
one gives them to you.
We never get any.
And then you
We go
cry.
training
No,
and I cry. I
they
go,
come up and give
Brian,
one
why
to
are you
me.
gonna? Yeah.
And
I
like,
go,
how come
Brian,
they
what did you
give you a
get?
coin? I go, because you go on
Exactly.
our podcast and you make fun
Because
of
I
everyone and their
coined bash.
coins.
Because
So
it's stupid. Melt them down and build something to a fallen officer or something. Because that coin, you know what? A long time ago, they go, hey, we were with this Beltway company, and they go, hey, what do we want to give out? We're really hot on coins, and this was double digits years ago. And we said, hey, you know what we want to do? We want to make a pink, my favorite color in the whole planet,
it
uh,
is
uh, 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 for
a
amputations.
tourniquet.
Stop. Tourniquet. Sorry, long day and my back is killing me. We want to give out a pink tourniquet. And the guy goes, why the F would you want to give out a pink tourniquet? If you look in your kit and you see that pink tourniquet,
It's
you'll remember
yeah,
immediately the
what
value
it's
of the
yeah.
training that you just got and what's really important. I don't feel that way with the coin. I don't hand out tongue depressors to remember that I got to say to go to the dentist. I know, Brian, but see with me, why do we link emotion into
You
training?
you know
Because
what
emotional
grinds
memory.
my
Yeah,
gears?
yeah, here
You're
we are
doing the
with the
Peter.
screaming goat yesterday.
You're
But emotions, Brian, are what
yeah,
tie us in. You know what?
yeah,
There's a segment of our audience that listens to this just to hear me blow off on something stupid.
yeah.
Sean, our consigliere sent me one yesterday. I admonished somebody or cautioned somebody by saying, "Hey, you're washing your colors with your whites," you know. And I was
Oh,
talking about the
about the quote.
washing
Yeah.
machine and saying, "Yeah."
Oh,
And
yeah.
Sean
That's
he just sent me a just a
yeah.
ha, and I'm like, "Hey, but we really mean what we're saying here.
Someone would
You
take
can
that. Yeah, but that's
can you
stupid. I mean,
imagine
yeah,
that?
I
You
don't,
can
I'm not even
fix
gonna, I don't even respond to people who want to do dumb shit like that. It's like,
don't
fine.
spar with us because what
Yeah.
we're trying to talk about is that whether it's an industrial accident, a domestic violence situation, or an ambush, you can change a negative interpretation of a situation for a positive one. And you can do
Well,
that through your training and
that
it will linger. It
that
will
helps,
last.
but that's the point is, and that's why you boil it down to elements. And you brought it up at the
I do.
beginning, but I was fortunate enough, like the first time, I ever got hit by, it was a massive
Yep.
IED, and one of my
Yep.
buddies died, and a lot of us got pretty messed up. But like, I was fortunate enough that the next day, we actually had, the chaplain came by and put our whole team together. I was like, all right, this is what
Yep.
happened. Like, we're going to talk about it right now. And
Yep.
he reframed it as, okay, but what did we do well that day? And then so we sat there and did an AAR of everything that happened, but we talked about, well, actually, we did this really well. Oh, hey, we know that medevac procedure actually, it wasn't enough time to save his
Yep.
life. It was never going to happen. However, the process worked. Hey, what else did we do? And so we sat there,
Exactly.
but that was for a different purpose. And the idea, it's the same thing of any of those situations. Like, well, here's all of the elements that we have in there. What are the ones that are difficult for you to understand? Let me explain that.
Exactly.
This is what that means. This is what it smells like. This is what it tastes like. This is what it feels like. All right, you're going to get this. Now let's go into this new area where we don't understand it. How can I apply that? Okay. And those simple ways of doing stuff, and you always call it, like doing the morning roll call training, the 5 minutes
I
to
believe
go
it.
over something is huge. And you added in the example that was like, especially the HME one, or the home
Yeah.
explosive one. I mean, meaning with the ketones, with getting a nail polish
Yep.
remover on a thing, because there's only one place you should ever smell that, and if you're not in a nail salon, right, or underneath the sink in my bathroom with my wife's stuff, like, then I shouldn't smell that anywhere else.
But that's how we learn, right?
Right.
So you've been around with me a long time. You've been before we even knew each other. We knew each other, before we were friends, we had to work together, and before we were colleagues, we had a different situations that we encountered. But all that time, you remember when I was training instructors, I would pick the senior instructor that had the best emotional memory and problem focused approach, and I would put them in front of you consistently. And what types of things did they do all the time? And, well, so what does that mean?
Yeah.
Okay. End every sentence with Your Honor, right? Why? Because you reinforce things. Now, I also have to reinforce that you're always going to be scared, because you're telling me that sitting down and training a cognitive interpretation for the real event is going to fix fear. And you can't fix fear.
But
You can't fix your amygdalic response to it, but you can anticipate fear. And the anticipation of those situations make you
sooner.
smarter when the
And
situation is
and
happening,
and
because
and
you
what
detect the elements and you're not surprised. And the
well,
shock,
that's the
that
thing.
surprise is killing
A
you.
lot of that comes from the fear would become from a surprise in a situation. What we're saying is, if you
Exactly.
focus on everything before that, yes, there's going to be a little bit of fear, but it's not going to be as much, if you're figuring out
That's
as you're
inoculation.
picking up, going, oh, okay, I see what's happening here. I see where this is going. I better do something now. So now I'm not in that where I'm scared or some fear response. Yes, it's
Yep.
going to be on board because of whatever the catastrophic situation is, but I wasn't surprised by it. Therefore, I can operate very, very well, in fact, better, for short periods of time in that area, in that
You're
zone
exactly right.
of cognitive
Isn't that our
ability.
goal?
Yeah,
Brian, isn't that our goal?
that's the point.
So I'll throw one at you. I'm reading one the other day, and it just ticks me off. My back is killing me. And by the way, no Toradol, folks. Send Toradol. No, you can't do that through the mail. I'm reading one on LinkedIn, my only social media, and it's this person telling me how to be a life coach and all this other stuff. And they're 22 years old, and look at me, and I'm beautiful, and I'm healthy, and I'm wearing great clothes, and I'm on a yacht. I'll be your success model. And I'm just steaming. And so I tell Shelly why I'm steaming, and she goes, "Yeah, but you got a kid in London that you're looking at that's like 30, and you're always thumbs up in all of his gear, Adam Parr." And I said, Adam Parr almost died from a horrific injury when he was a kid. He grew up in a shithole where he had to fight for life in a broken family dynamic. Adam, I'm not going to tell your story. You tell it great. But that kid learned more, Brian,
Right.
before he had pubes,
Yeah.
right, than most people will do in their entire life. So I would rather put my money there. So what am I saying? You also, for training, need a high valence role model. What? What does that mean? That
Yeah.
means somebody that knows how to tap into that emotion, because the emotional memory will last much longer than your problem focused architecture. That's why they have to put those on laminated, and they call them checklists, because your
Yeah.
brain doesn't.
Yeah, it
That's
doesn't.
why there's a
Yeah.
9 line. How many
Yeah.
times did it take you doing a
Yeah.
9 line before it was flawless?
Yeah,
Right?
exactly.
And then
Yeah.
then what did the helo or the A10 pilot tell you? No, 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 kid, just tell me, where you guys are. I got it from there.
Yeah.
Right? How many times did things like that happen? That's how we learn, Brian. So training should mimic likely real life events and challenge me and have an emotional toll, but it can't be fear-based and it can't be surprise-based every time, because those will create a negative feedback loop, and your brain will just say, well, fuck, I'm not going there. And then you'll be doing the should I stay or should I go in your car on the way to every call. Does that make sense?
Right.
Because when living or dying is so narrow, I want to make sure that my training is broad and deep. That's
Yeah.
all I'm saying.
No, and I think that's kind of a good place to kind of start, to wrap it on. Is focusing on what elements do I need to
Yeah.
have? What don't I need to have? Is this really producing an outcome? What are my actual objectives? Even if it's something small, like I have to have some objective to, if I'm going to talk about something for 5 minutes. Okay, I only have 5 minutes. Great. What's the
Yep.
one thing I want you to get from that? And then I can
So
dance
let me
around,
give
do
you one.
whatever. But
Yeah.
that's the idea is
Uh,
what's the absolute takeaway here, so we're not wasting anyone's time.
an old soldier that's retiring this month, a great copper. I'm not going to say any more than that. Early in his career, we're FTOing him, and Chantal will know who I'm talking about. And this kid's running from a stolen. And so we're right on the verge of our area coming into another area. So I'm absolutely unfamiliar with the way the streets go. And I tell the kid that's doing the running, I'm saying, don't go far, because I'm not sure exactly where we are yet, right? You know me, map recon, but it's a foot pursuit. So this speedball that's just an amazing shape not only runs this kid down, but he tackles him. And they slide 15 feet on the pavement.
Jeez.
The kid that he tackled, from the top of his head to the tips of his toes, was one large scab. Bleeding. We had to go to the emergency room. We had to
Yeah.
do everything, right? So the lesson for the day was, even right back to Jurassic Park, even though you could,
Yeah.
should you have? Because wasn't there another option, like on the grass, okay, or a less than lethal force munition, or rounding him into a corner and then when he goes to ground, right? So what we're trying to teach in training is there's options. And certain options that you take have consequences. So spending all night in the ER with a kid for receiving and concealing, right, stolen
Yeah.
property,
Yeah.
that's going to be a misdemeanor. He's going to be bounced on,
Well,
Brian.
yeah, now
A
he's not
felony
gonna
at
get,
the
yeah.
beginning, but yeah.
Yeah.
But you see what I'm trying to say. But how do you do that without crushing that cop's creativity? Because he did what he was trained to do. He's trained to, hey, they run, we chase them.
Yeah.
They try to get away, we catch them. You see that balance that's there? So we got to be legal, we got to be moral, we got to be ethical, but we also have to stimulate creativity. And creativity, the best, comes from advanced critical thinking, because your creativity saying, hey, we're going to light a gas pump on fire and shoot it into the stolen car, or we're going to do something else. Yeah, those are creative, and that's what's called case law, and you go to
Yeah.
prison,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
So
Yeah.
let's give them good options. CBT gives people good options to trade for bad. Good training does the same thing
Right.
at a cognitive level, right?
Yeah, it's giving people, like you just said, good options, or understanding that you have choices, and those,
A
and if you
better option than
if
you're
you
using,
if you
maybe.
focus on these as what are the decisions I'm making.
Yep.
It also helps me understand that I have some control in the situation, right? I have
Eh,
something. I get to influence my own decision making, so therefore I can
we're right
influence the
back,
outcome.
Brian, we're right back to how CBT could help suicidal behavior.
Yeah.
The thinking on the therapeutic side. Why? Because if I know what is suicide, suicide is a permanent solution to a temporary situation, but not for the person that's pulling the trigger. They think it's never going to get better, right? So a CBT option would be to show them that they can trade those triggers and cognitive interpretations for a positive interpretation, Brian. So isn't that a form of training? That's what we're talking about. We're trying to stimulate minds. So if you're listening to us, we're not saying we have all the answers, but we're saying that these scientific answers that are based in valid theory are where your money should be going, not some gosh damn technological shit that's just going to sit in a corner and people are going to hang clothes on.
No, I'm saying we are the only ones with the answers. You
Yeah,
must
you are
hire
too.
us.
Exactly. No,
there,
that's a good way. That's a better business plan, actually. Can you
there's no
erase
one
that other
else
shit?
doing anything like
No, but
this.
Brian,
No,
hey,
no, no, but
hey, you know why my ass is kicked? Because my assault bike fights back.
It
And
does.
so
Pushes back.
and guess what? It kicked my ass. And then I went and I lifted and I gosh damn pulled a muscle. And I'm in pain because I'm trying to better myself. That's great. Because when I go to somebody else's basement, Brian, their treadmill, I see all their clothes from the laundry hanging on it, and I see books stacked up. And that's not how you want to be, folks. If you've got a job and that job could kill you, you need to get your shit together and learn about what's best in training.
Okay, I think that's a good point to end on. So thanks everyone for tuning in. We do appreciate it. We obviously have more on the Patreon side, and you can check us out at too. There's other stuff at the leftofgregpodcast.com. Please tell your friends about the show if you enjoyed it. Send them your favorite episode, and that really helps us out a lot. So we do
It really
appreciate
does.
everyone for listening, and those of you who are sharing, and obviously reaching out with questions, because that was today's topic in this entire discussion was focused on a question in an article someone sent us. So we like to get to that and discuss it back and forth and get their reactions. Obviously, we do more of that on the Patreon side as well, for those folks who want to help support the show. And we appreciate all of you for listening. We do thank you so much. We got a lot more coming up this year. So please stay tuned and don't forget that training changes behavior.